Good morning to everyone joining us today. Want to thank you again. Today's April 20th. Our topic today is going to be basic scripting in Spyder Studio, which will again keep in mind will be basically identical in Christie Advanced, the other software. I'm joined today again as usual with Jason Wines and Joel Terensky. They're going to be answering your questions as we go through this. We will. We know you guys got lots of choices out there because everybody's doing webinars now, so we really appreciate you guys showing up to these things. Love the questions. Hopefully, we're getting these videos up timely to where you can watch them. I'm doing some short edits on them so you can kind of bring your attention and kind of scrub out some stuff that might not be good for webinars. Anyway, so here we are. So let me go ahead and share my screen here real quick. Scripting. What is scripting? Typically, the way you need to think about scripting, usually scripting and command keys should be almost in the same category, right? Command keys, or basically every command key has a script built into it, okay? Actually, the external protocol command is called recall script queue. So it's actually referring to the command key as a script element or a script item. So one thing to understand, I think I've touched on a couple things, but basically for every command key you build, if I were to go in here and just start, I'll just trigger a look here. We got, right, call it this one. Basically, I have my simulator up above, right? I have that command key number 12 in the grid, look for on the screen. And in the script window, you see basically several items up here, okay? So along the top is where you see all of your layers, okay? So I can get layer properties right up here in the simulator. I can get layer properties in the system patch. I can get layer properties also in the script window along the top area up here. This shows me what layer is currently being used with the little tally dot up there on the top. And since those are using mixers, you can see which one's in program and which one's in preview. You can see the last source that was loaded to that layer. Okay, even if I clear the screen and nothing is on the screen anymore, notice that the source still resides on the layer. It just sits there ready to go to where if I were to go and add a layer to the simulator, it's just going to simply say, all right, if I bring up layer 1, you'll see that it shows that IMAG is currently going to be loaded to layer 1. Okay, so just because there's still a source up there doesn't mean that it's going to affect your programming in any way, right, or affect the performance. The other thing on the left you'll see is your queue, okay? So if you think about it, between the row of layers and the column of queues, you can almost look at this as kind of like a cross point of when your items are going to enter and show up on the screen. So if I were to go preview on a command key, you'll notice that the queue line starts at the preview queue, okay? And notice that button on the command key, that preview button, hard-coded to Q0 preview, and the program button hard-coded to go to Q1. Okay, so when that Q line, the big red line that you see going through there, is striking through an element, right? These are all elements in our script window. When it's below the top of the element and above the bottom, that means it's somewhere in the program area. Okay, so most of these command keys that I've built only have two queues, one to basically take it to preview and another one to bring it onto the screen. So as I would jump from one look to the next, I could preview, take, and move forward that way. Now, anytime we want to go beyond just a simple go beyond a single queue, we call that scripting. So I've created another tab in my command key grid called scripting. I'm just going to go to that one. I've also copied my clear command key in here, a relative with a long off element on there to clear off all the any sources that are on the screen. So we're going to start off very basic, okay? And we're not going to get into too many advanced scripting topics. I really just want to lay down a foundation for what scripting is, okay? So what I'm going to do is I'm going to start with just a very simple command key. I'm going to create an empty command key. I'm going to call it script. okay? And notice I can come up here and kind of click on the two buttons, and you can see the queue line popping up and down based on what queue I use, right? So I'm just going to go ahead and bring a single source into and enter and add a new item to my existing command key. Remember, when we created command keys, there are two ways to do that. You can build the look in the simulator, okay, and then go over to the command key grid, right click right here, and say add from, and wherever you built it, whether it was in program or in preview or a combination of both, it would take a snapshot and record all of that information. Now, remember, I've already created the command key. I've created a blank, empty command key. To introduce new items to it, I don't add them to the simulator. I add them to the script window, okay? So I'm gonna go ahead and take a source here, and I'm just gonna drop it right down here onto under layer 1 on the program queue. You can kind of see my little cross point. I'm gonna drop it right there, okay? So when I hit program, notice that back when we talk about the command keys, that element, which is called a source element. This is the most basic of script elements we have. So this element has multiple settings over here. So if I click on it, I go over to the property panel, the source element, the first one is basically just a thumbnail, okay? So that item you see right there, very so small, that's the thumbnail that I've used that says IMAG on it, right? I can change that by just simply hitting browse and going and picking a new thumbnail and using it instead. Excuse me, I'm gonna circle back to this override global settings. Tapped into that on a previous webinar, but we'll talk about it a little bit more in a few minutes. Source options. So I've created this command key with the source called IMAG. Let's say I get that. Let's say I created it. I wanted it, but I wanted it with a different source, or they chose maybe want to use Keynote instead of IMAG. I can simply go to the drop-down list for sources. It'll give me my source list. And let me just scroll down to Keynote. And when I relaunch this command key, boom, now it loads in Keynote, okay? It'll still apply all the same keyframes, size, position, border, drop shadow, all that. All it's gonna do is just simply change the source, okay? If the two sources are different aspect ratios, it's always gonna maintain the width of the layer. So if it's a smaller aspect ratio, meaning 4:3 or something like that, the layer will get taller, okay? If it's a higher aspect ratio, the layer will get shorter, okay, because it's always going to maintain the width. So you have source options for that element. Below that, you've got size and location. Very important menu when it comes to scripting in an element, right? The element, the size and location tab in that element determines what pixel space that layer is going to get loaded to, okay? What layer is going to get loaded to that pixel space, right? Let me put this, I'm going to make this actually absolute for now, okay? So when I look at that one again, notice right here it says a default. When I drag that element into the script window, it doesn't know which pixel space I want it to go to, so it defaults to pixel space ID 0. So it went to house left, which was the first pixel space I created for this configuration. So if I were to drop down the list, there are all my pixel spaces. I can drop and say I want it in the widescreen, and you'll see that the layer will automatically just simply shift itself over and load it into the widescreen. I can pick any other one, DSM2, boom, and it's gonna, again, carry over the same keyframes. So if its relative coordinates are different or to the right, they're gonna be shifted over to the right in wherever I load it. I'll put this back in the, I'll go ahead and put this in the all program, okay? So notice there, and it always defaults to the center. Okay, so layer, if I wanted to choose a different layer, remember layers have a Z order, okay? Layer 1 is always on the bottom, okay? It's on top of your pixel space backgrounds, but as far as the layer priority, it's always the furthest one back, okay? So layer 2, when introduced, will go over the top of layer 1, and if they happen to overlap, 3 will go over the top of both of them, 4, and so on, all the way up through 24. And this is regardless of the size of your system, the layer number will always stick. This is just it's the hard-coded architecture of the layers, okay? So if I wanted to pick a different layer, I pick layer 6. Boom, notice the element in the script window has now shifted over under layer 6. obviously, and also as well, the layer in the program preview area is changed to 6. And the reason layer 1's gone and layer 6 now appears, it's because it's absolute. Okay, absolutely only show layer 6. Absolutely only show layer 1. Okay, so as I change that layer number, it'll automatically refresh it. Okay, so let's put that back on layer 1 here. Then we get down to the start queue. Okay, by default, it's always going to put the element in the number 1 queue, the start queue. The start queue is indicating, it's asking you, when do you want this item to appear in program? Okay, you'll see that we can do a sequence. So this particular item may be coming in later in the script. So I'm just saying, what queue do I want it to be to basically dissolve onto the program area? Okay, or at least be entered into the loaded into the program area. So if I were to say, if I just change the up arrow here and start shifting at 1, or it goes to 2, 3, 4, you can see the element shifting down in the script window. Okay, meaning I hit clear, I go preview, there's my line, and the way you advance a script in advance with the command key is simply by just tapping the space bar. So if I hit the space bar once, you'll see the queue line jump down. You hit it again, it goes to Q3. Now notice I put that on Q4 to hit program. So when I hit Q3, boom, it appears in preview now. So as I hit the space bar once more, and that line, the queue line, actually strikes through the center, or again, below the top or above the bottom, it's going to basically enter the program area as I hit space. Okay, now if I were to keep hitting space, notice that the queue line is going to drop down below the element, and that will mix it off of the screen. Okay, so again, clear, preview. Even if I took that to program, it's still going to go only to Q1, but that element isn't going to come into the picture for another 2 queues. 1, 2 into preview, 3 into program. Okay, so that's kind of important to understand the queue start queue and the queue length. Oh wait, we're going to talk about QLineKit right now. Sorry, getting ahead of myself. We'll pop that back up and notice it kind of appears right there. Now, queue length. The default length is 2 queues. Okay, bring it on, take it off. If I start adding additional queues to that, so I put 5 queues, let's call it 6, right? Now look at that element, right? It's elongated, okay, to span across multiple queues. Okay, so I can go ahead and clear, and when I hit preview, notice it shows up where I originally have it. And let's say we want that just right up there, kind of centered. I'll go ahead and set my keyframe, and I'm defining the preview queue, right? So when I go to program, that's where it's going to show. Okay, now that keyframe in this sense is what we call the driving keyframe. We are going to drive that layer's size, position, border, drop shadow, all of those items, right, that we consider a keyframe down the script. So when I hit the space bar, boom, it carries the same keyframes down. But notice it doesn't go anywhere. The layer doesn't move, doesn't do anything. Hit it again, goes to Q3, 4, 5, and then when I hit this last queue on Q6, dissolves off the screen. Okay, so back from the top, straight to program, there it comes, next, 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 next. Okay. Okay, let me go ahead and go back up to the top here. I'll adjust this element and make it back to normal. If I expand the next option here where you see entrance and exit options, right? Entrance is the speed in which that item will dissolve into program, okay? Enter into program. Exit is how quickly it will dissolve out of a program, okay? So notice that they're grayed out, okay? It's because I have a setting turned on right here under frame configuration. There is a scripting engine item here that basically says enable elements global settings. And I have all of my duration, my entrance and exit options set to 15 frames. So regardless, even though it said grayed out on this command key right here, sorry, go back to the element, it shows 60 there. Notice it's grayed out. Okay, that means the default is 60, but I have it overridden to go to 15 frames. If I want to change that, I can actually go up here to say override the global settings and then put in my own manual number. Okay, so keep that in mind. If you want the item to dissolve on the screen faster, or if you want a nice slow dissolve on there, you can adjust that entrance option the same way. Same with exit, okay? Exit gets the same options. Now there's an effect in here. These are all kind of PowerPoint effects. I'll let you play with these. I'm not going to get into it in this basic version, but you can go in and play with those looks, the way the layer behaves, but be cautious with durations because sometimes they can look a little weird if you have a too fast of a duration or too slow of a duration, okay? But let's say if you watch, if I go clear preview and I go next, 15 frames, right? Let me go back to preview here. And then here's what I'm going to do is I'm going to say on this cue, sorry, whoopsie. I'm going to override that entrance option and I'm going to make it 1 minute or 1 second. Okay. So if I were to go next, it takes 1 second to come on. And then maybe the exit duration is going to be, I don't know, something, we'll make it something longer, like 120, let's do like 180. So this will be a 3-second exit. So you'll see it fade off of program at 3 seconds. 1, 2, 3, gone, okay? So now that we've got some of the, these element menus, and the last one is slave layers. This is a completely advanced topic for parallel configurations. We're not going to cover that today. Okay. But one thing you want to remember when we talk about command keys, where we're kind of just scratch the surface, remember when this command key is live or launched, I'm in that live edit mode. It's important to remember that because if I adjust any keyframe values in the simulator, they're going to be automatically remembered. Okay, and save. So when I go to preview, notice that the layer is still over to the lower right when I edited it. Okay, so you want to make sure that you have, you don't manipulate the layer unless you actually really want to in that area. Okay, so scripting, we're going to go beyond. So here's what I'm going to do is I'm going to go ahead and take this element. Now the other way I can adjust the layer, the start queue, or the queue length for that element in the script window is just simply by going down here and grabbing it and moving it where I want it to go. Okay, I can drag it. It won't automatically update in the simulator, but I can drag it over to here. I can drag it over to layer 20. I can drag it down lower in the script. I can move it back over. Let's put it on layer 5. And if I want to extend the queue length, I just grab the bottom. I get that little double arrow, and I can just drag it down however long I want it to go. Okay, and then I can then move this item anywhere I want. Okay, now we're only working with a single layer, so it's going to be pretty simple here for the first few minutes. So I've elongated that down 6 queues. Okay, and I want this, I'm going to make it very simple. And anybody who's been through my training, they see me, I kind of do the same kind of motions here, more or less to just take baby steps through the behaviors of how these things work, and we kind of progressively add more things into it and let you change it. So let's say the idea is that layer is going to start there in the main screen, but then on the Q2, I want it to fly to house left. Okay, literally just fly over there. In order to do that, I need to edit the keyframe. Okay, but I need to edit it on the queue I want it to land on. Okay, so I need to add a keyframe for Q2, an editable keyframe. So how do you add a keyframe? Well, you see this little box right here at each queue. Okay, if I always joke, you know, it's right there. If I want to add the queue, it's got to be below the red line. It's got to be under the layer I want it on. And if I just simply right click, I could say add keyframe, and it puts in this little yellow key icon. Okay. And what it does is it makes that particular layer on that particular queue editable. Okay, I can change it. It's going to alter. I can alter it from its current position in Q1. So what I'll do is I'm just going to go ahead and clear this for a second, and then go ahead and relaunch it up to the first queue. Now from here, this is where scripting takes a little practice, right? So what you need to realize and kind of keep in mind, program and preview are not just simply queues 0 and 1, okay? They are what's above the red line and what's below the red line, okay? What's above the red line is in program. That's what you're seeing on the screen. What's below the red line is what's going to happen next. Okay, so now that I've got this command key up there, I want to change what happens next. So I would edit the preview layer. Okay, so I'm going to come right down here, and I'm just going to simply snap that layer to the right. And let's go ahead and just, I'm going to set it to a very specific size here, 1920, and I'm going to snap it left and to the top so I know it's snug into that position. And what I've done is I've edited the keyframe for layer 5 in Q2. Okay, so again, take it from the top, clear, preview. Okay, we see what's going to happen on the next Q, right, in Q1. So I hit the space bar, dissolves on the screen. Look at the preview layer now. Now it's shifted over and it's in its position. And when I hit the space bar again, you're going to see that layer fly to its position. Okay, what it did is it changed its XY position, also changed its size because the size changed slightly, and it did it at a very specific duration, right? Remember, all of those items are keyframes. So if I were to select the layer, I could find out exactly what all those things are. I just go right over here, go to keyframe. I can see it's going to move at 60 frames per second when it goes to Q2. These are the positions that's going to go to. Crop, pan, zoom, motion, all that stuff, border shadows, all of that stuff would be applied. Now, the trick is when I come back here, if I were to keep hitting the space bar, that becomes my new driving keyframe because there's nothing below it to change it. It's not going to revert back to the original one. It's going to take that one and push it down the script. Okay. Strangely quiet out there with the questions, which is good. That's good. So if I keep going until the end, it's going to mix off the screen. Okay. Oops, I'm not looking at the right window here. I closed. There's probably all kinds of questions and I'm just not seeing them. There we go. Anyway, so I'll take it back to the top. Okay, so I get there, go to there. Now I want that layer to go back to the right. I want it to fly all from house left across widescreen into house right. Now, one thing to remember, the whole reason I could take that layer and move it from widescreen to house left is because I loaded that layer in the all program. Okay, I cannot move. Well, let's do it this way. Let's say, well, I'll circle back to that. I cannot have that layer loaded in widescreen and then fly to house left when it's assigned to the all program. Okay, it would have to be loaded. I'm sorry, wait, I can't fly it there if it's in house left, okay, or in the widescreen. It would have to dissolve and then redissolve back on in its destination, wherever it was going. So in order for it to move from one pixel space to another, it has to be loaded to the all program. Now, if I go back to the top up here and I say, okay, let's say that this element was loaded in just the widescreen. Okay, and notice it readjusted itself. It applied the keyframes because they're relative coordinates, slightly up, slightly off, and you can even see the preview layer there is kind of based on its position. It is moved. Okay, so I would have to correct this by just saying, all right, I'm going to center this horizontally or vertically, I'm sorry, and then I would take this one. And if I'm going to stay within the same pixel space, I can edit that preview queue. And now if I were to go from one to the other, it's just going to fly up into that corner. But if I try to say, take this over to here, sorry, over to the house left, notice what it says. It says outside pixel space. Okay, normal. And if I take it, it'll fly over there, but guess what? You're not going to see it, okay? Because that layer is, remember, slick. Source, layer, pixel space, keyframe. Those are the things you have to define. So as it flew from widescreen to house left, it would just simply exit widescreen and go nowhere. It would just, the layer is physically out there, but it's just not viewable in the house left, okay? So let me go back and correct this back the way we had it. And put this back here. All program. It's going to make all these adjustments again. Let's shift that back up. And again, you can see that relative coordinate being applied. So it just basically pushed it further out. So let's go ahead and say up to the top, to the left. Oops, 1920, top left. Okay.
So starts there, goes over to there. I want it to fly back the other way. So I'm going to add a keyframe below the line. Whoops, actually hit something there. I can go right down here because that's what I want to change is the third cue. I can right click, add a keyframe, and then I could either edit it in preview, or if I want to do advance to that cue. And what it does when I add the keyframe, it's recording the layer's current values, right? But it's making them editable. So now I could say, all right, now that I'm editing Q3, remember, notice I advanced my Q line. So now that the Q I want to edit is in program. So I don't edit the preview layer, I edit the program layer. Okay. So I'm just going to say snap back over to there to the right. Whoops, I clicked the wrong layer. My bad. Right here, I'm going to snap over to the right to see it fly over. But on this case, I want it to go very slow. I want it to take like a 5-second walk across the screens. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to edit the duration of that keyframe. I'm going to put it at 300 frames. Okay, and I'm editing this layer's keyframe. So again, I'll clear, preview, Q1, there it is. Now, next cue, it's going to slide over 1 second to the house left. There it goes. Now I hit it again. Now you can see my preview layers over there on the house right. Now it should take 5 full seconds to go over there. And I'll just go 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. Okay. Now that may not time with the webinar, but we'll see what happens. And then again, beyond that, that's my new driving keyframe. So if I want to say, all right, down here, I'll jump down. Now we want it to move back to the middle. Whoops. Now we want it to move back to the middle. Let's say that the aspect ratio is going to be 3. Bear with me here a second. 3.318. We'll make it. I just know these numbers off the top of my head. Oops, that's position, not size. 3584. Center and snap to the top. And then the next cue is going to make it maybe snap back, like you set that, come back to right here. So now I didn't advance, did I? I think I jumped the gun on that one. That was my bad. Next, I did. I edited the wrong cue. That's what you got to be careful about, right? So there's our 5-second move to here. Another 5-second move because it carried over the same duration, right? So let me do this real quick. So if I wanted to correct that, say I wanted the wide aspect ratio look on the program cue, I could go right down here to that layer in the preview cue, copy keyframe. Sorry, I got a bug flying in front of me. Copy keyframe, come right up here, paste keyframe, right? Then come down here, treatments, I'm gonna remove treatments and adjust this one to do this, what I wanted it to do, and now I should be able to jump down to there, and now it has my sequence, right? So now I've got clear, preview, next, 5 seconds, next, another 5 seconds. So I think I may shorten that one up. So when it gets to here, I'm gonna say, let's make that 2 seconds long. And when it gets to here, we'll make it 1 second long, okay? So again, from the top, one last time, and then I'll show you some other cool stuff. To the left, to the right, back to the center, 2 seconds, and then bounce back to the middle and then mix off the screen, okay? Now this is one layer in one command key, okay? Yeah, Jason.
So there's a question that came in. The global settings in Advanced and Studio are in slightly different places. Could you touch on that?
Yeah, I will. Okay. Yeah, I'm gonna hit that on the back end, but let me just open up Advanced real fast because it's almost identical with the other than the area of. Oh, this is opening on the wrong screen. So that menu where you set the global overrides is not in the frame configuration menu. Here in Advanced, it's under File, under Properties, okay?
and you'll see it right over here on the right-hand side, okay? You can see I kind of go with a 15 frame duration wherever I go, so. But that's where you'd make, otherwise everything else is the same, but that's where you would just set those global overrides, okay? Okay, back to my original command key here. So this is one layer going through the process of 6 Qs, right? And on the 6th Q with it mixing off the screen. Now, say I wanted it, I had a conflict where I wanted it to come over the top of another source. All I have to do right now is simply just move this element to a different layer, a higher number, a downstream layer, and when I launch it, it'll use the different number now. So now it's under 16, and it's going to do everything with 16, right? Or if I move it back over to here, back to layer 5, start it up again, it's going to mix off, put up layer 5. Now, another way to apply treatments to a script, okay? You can go ahead and say on this queue, I should be able to apply that treatment right there and just drag it right onto that queue of that element. Boom, right? And that should be, I can't remember, I think I just dragged a border or a size. Yeah, 1920. So I can drag treatments directly from the treatment list and apply them to queues in the script window on those elements. I can't drop them. I can drop them on the layer, but it's not going to add it to the script, right? I can drop them right here and it'll just apply it there, or I can't drop it to an empty area. It has to be on an element, okay? Now, one thing you can do now is, as I circle back to my mixer comment, you can right click on this element. And you got other things you can do. You can disable that element temporarily, right? We talked about this in the command keys webinar. One you can do is convert to mixer. And you're going to see that element now it's going to span across 2 adjacent layers. So it took the next available downstream layer from 5 and acquired 6 to it, right? So now if I were to clear, and if you remember, mixers use 2 layers. So if I take that to preview, the first layer of that mixer gets loaded to preview. And when I hit program, that layer mixes up and then it loads the next layer, which would be 6 into preview. And there you go. So now I've got 5 in program, 6 in preview. Now, when I step through the sequence by hitting the space bar, those 2 layers, anytime there's a change in the keyframe, it's going to dissolve those 2 layers, okay? Whether it's a source change or a keyframe change, anything, even if the layer is only adjusted by 1 pixel, it's going to mix those layers, right? So if I go here and I hit the space bar, you'll see layer 6 transitioned up and flew at the same time. That's because this element under mixer options has a transition type. So there's 3 different transition types: morph, mix. I'm sorry, 4: morph, mix, mix through black, and true mix. We'll talk about that in a little bit of detail, but not a ton. Okay. But morph is the default. That means that layer is not going to come off the screen. It's going to change aspect ratio and fly at whatever duration, whatever size you choose, whatever aspect ratio you choose, and it's going to dissolve and land on that keyframe within that specified duration, okay? So notice that, so it brought it down. Now I go back across the way. Watch the transition here as we go across. Watch the layer number here. Watch, right as I transition this. You'll see 6, now you start to see 5, boom, and then it lands right there, boom. So now I have layer 6 in preview. 5 came up, 6 went down, okay? Do it again. Oops, I double tapped that, my bad. So now you can see it went through each of those. So you say, wow, okay, well, didn't the layer do the same thing? Wasn't the effect the same thing without burning 2 layers, right? You're right, that's very much the case. The nice thing about using a mixer now is that, notice in each queue, I can say, well, in the first queue, I'm using Keynote, okay? But on the second queue, I want graphics. And on the third queue, I want iMac. And on the fourth queue, I want Playback Pro. And on the 5th queue, I want Blu-ray. And on the last queue, it's going to dissolve out. But now you can see I've got different sources at different queues for the same mixer in that script. So now I can clear, preview, loads up the first source in my mixer there. And when I take it to the screen, goes up, and look what it does. It loads layer 6 with my next source, okay? And when I hit the transition, or when I hit the space bar to go to the next cue, slowly crossfades over there and moves, okay? Now, instead of IMAG, let's choose that 4K source. So that was a Mustang, right? I'm gonna put that right there. And notice I just dropped it right in there. And if I double click on that cue again right here, I can jump to any cue I want right in the script queue, right over here on the left side. So if I double click on 2, watch right here, it'll refresh that layer. Or it should have. Oh yeah, it did, Mustang right there. So what's significant about Mustang? Well, graphics 1 is HD. Mustang is UHD, okay? So now I'm taking a layer that's gonna it's going to morph across 3 different pixel spaces and crossfade between HD and 4K. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. Boom. Okay. Again, 6 came down, loaded my next source, space, crossfade, morph, right? So now it's changing aspect ratio, changing source, all of that with those 2 layers. And all it is those 2 layers going back and forth, right? Crossfading between the 2. Okay. So very cool. I would say, well, I usually say, go do that with another product, right? Transition a source from one destination across another into a third while also changing format, connector type, and resolution all at the same time. Okay. Now, I lost my train of thought. Again, with the mixer, hey Jason, are you here to save me? No, I'm kidding.
There is a question. Pedro asked, can he be on a queue in the script and be able to preview a previous queue?
You know what? Thank you, Pedro, for the segue, because that's where I was going. That was a perfect question. So here's the trick, right? I'm going to convert this back to relative. So as I go through here and I start stepping through these, notice I'm always seeing what's happening next in the preview pixel space, right? I can see what's going to happen next. Now, if I were to go and double click on a queue, I can jump directly to any one of those queues, right? But say I'm at Q5 here with Blu-ray in the middle, but I want to go back because I want to jump back up to this graphics look, right? There is no way to preview that look without going there, right? At least not within Studio as it sits right now. There are probably third-party products out there that will let you pick which queue you want to jump to, but to be able to preview it first is another question. So there's no way for me to go right to this queue and preview it before I take it, okay? That's the one. Here's the thing with scripting. It's a very powerful tool that makes it very easy to go through a sequence of events, okay? Now remember, I've still only got one command key here, right? All of this resides within that command key. So when I do that, the only way to dive into another queue is to simply double click on that Q2 and let it go right to where it needs to go. I can't preview it first, okay? Unfortunately, that's the way it is, okay? So sometimes, you know, I always ask this, 2 seconds, Jason. Sometimes I ask this question in training is, you know, how often do you have a show or an event that goes queue by queue by queue to the letter every time, no problem, whatever? Could I make these 5 command keys or these 4 command keys? Whoops, wrong. If I go back up to page 1, look, 1, 2, 3, 4. Could I make those in just simply 4 separate queues? Yeah, I could. I could easily. It's 4 of one, half, you know, 6 of one, half a dozen of the other. So I could do the same thing between look 1 through 4 here with 1 command key, just simply going down 4 different queues. But the beauty of this is that with the command keys, it allows me, with the relative command keys, it allows me to preview what I want to do first before I go to the next queue. Okay, so you have to ask yourself, do you have the luxury of everything going exactly to queue? Nothing ever going to change. And usually I get a bunch of chuckles in training. I go, how often do you do a show where you could go through a script and it never changes? I could probably see that almost everybody, all 70 people that are in this webinar right now are probably shaking their head because that rarely happens. It's like a unicorn. It doesn't happen all that often, right? So scripting is very cool for things like walk-ins, right? Doors. The doors are going to open and you just want some stuff kind of flying around. You can do like a little loop. I'll show you how you can automate this. But you want to be cautious with that, you know, making an entire event based off of one command key and a bunch of queues, okay? So, looking at questions here. Can you start at another part of the queue instead of starting at 1 and start 3 or 4? Not with the command keys. Sorry, it says can you start at another part of the queue instead of starting at part 1? Can you start the queue at start 3 or 4? No, because the command key buttons, not unfortunately, the command key buttons are hard coded to go to queue 0 for preview and 1 for program. Okay, so from a command key you can't. Now, again, some of these third-party devices that are out there can allow you to take you could have one command key like this that has 5 queues, but you can have 5 buttons to say, take it to Q1, take it to Q4, take it to Q3. You can very easily do that, but they'd be 5 separate buttons. So again, 6 of one, half a dozen of the other. So this is one pip on the screen, right? Now let's just play around with the transition type, right? So under the mixer here, whoops, let's go back to the top. I keep hitting the space bar and I don't mean to. If I click on the mixer right here, excuse me, you'll see under mixer options, you'll see transition type. Okay, not everybody likes the morph. I've discovered that in my my years of training that I love the morph because it's all kind of sexy. It flies from one position to another. But some people are like, nope, I just want it to crossfade. That's all I want it to do. All right, fine. We'll drop down the list and you'll see the next one is called mix. Okay, so what I've done is I've changed the transition type for this element. Okay, the whole element gets one transition type. Okay, I can't say on Q1 make it a morph, on Q2 make it a mix, Q3 make it a mix through black. Can't do that. The whole element has to have the same transition type. Okay, so now if I were to clear this and walk through the steps again, watch the transition type. So as it comes on, it's going to basically crossfade from one position to the other. 1 second, right? Here, 5-second duration. Same, all the keys, excuse me, all the same keyframe settings take place. Now all we're doing is just changing the type of transition. From here, it'll be a 2-second. Here, it'll be a 1 second. And now it'll mix off the screen. Okay, so that would be considered the mix transition. Okay, the mix through black basically waits for the layer to mix completely off the screen before mixing on the other layer. And what it does is it splits the duration in half. Okay, so whatever your duration setting is to, it's going to mix off the one layer at half the time and it mix on the layer at the other half of the time. So if this is a 1 second duration, it'll be 30 frames mix off, 30 frames mix on. Oops, sorry. Right here, off on. Now here, this will be 2.5 seconds off. 1, 2, 1, 2, boop, coming on again. This will be a 1 off, 1 on, 1 off, 1 on, or half on, half off. So you get those different types of transition options. Now the last one, everybody's gonna see me squirm with this last one. There was, we'll call it a Facebook string on our user group that there was, if you use the mix transition, right? There is a not a potential. What it does is that when it transitions, if you have a background, so you can see I have these backgrounds here. If I were to transition, now you're not going to see it in the simulator, and the thumbnail I have on there is actually kind of halfway transparent anyway. But as that source were to transition, you would actually, it would be opaque enough to where you might see the background through it. Okay, and that became a hot button for a lot of people. And now the morph does not do that. You can use the morph, and if they're just going back and forth between the two positions, it's just like a mix. It's just crossfading, and there is no opacity during that transition. But in the mix, there is a little bit of opacity. Now the trick is, I'm just going to create 2 quick command keys here. I'm going to call this look 1 and I'm going to make it graphics on here. Sorry, I'm just going to make this widescreen, and we're going to make it true mix, because this is the one I'm talking about. So what we came up with was something called the true mix, but it has some behaviors that can be, if you're not prepared for them, they may take you off guard. Okay, and it may be difficult to show you the subtle difference between these. Now I'm going to copy this. I'm going to call this look 2. Okay, go ahead and launch this new one and just simply change the source to something that's a little brighter here. Okay, now if I were to go here to here, okay, now I can't really put a timer in here, but if I were to clear and go preview, take, 5 comes up, right? And I would simply go direct to program on the other one, 6 should come up relatively quick and come off the screen. Now watch what happens when I go back to the other one. A little bit longer of a transition. The reason it's doing this, the true mix looks at the 2 layers, okay? 5 and 6 have a Z order, right? 5 is always going to be below layer 6. For the true mix, what it does is it says, okay, if initially when I'm going from on look 1 here to take look, it takes layer 5 up, perfect, fine. When I go direct to look 2, the duration for this should be the normal duration. Boom, it's going to come on and it comes on, because what it does is it brings that over the top of layer 5. Sorry, I don't mean to cover my face. Over the top of layer 5 and waits, right, for that layer 6 to finish its transition before it releases 5 down to preview. Okay, now going back the other duration, you're going to see that those layers, you're not going to see layer 5 come up as quick as you saw the first one, because what it's going to do is it's going to say, okay, when you're ready to go, here's layer 6, here's layer 5. When it comes up, it's going to bring up layer 5 behind, wait for it to go full, dissolve fully on, then release layer 6 and let it go. And that process is to prevent the opacity. It's one of those things that the algorithm, to figure out how to make that, that opacity, make sure that there's no opacity, isn't on the mix type of duration or the mix type of transition. If the layer is going to be in the same position on both times, just use a morph. That way you can ensure that won't happen, unless it has to move positions. Okay. So those are the different mixer transition types. So let's back up a little bit here. And so what can you do with some basic scripting, as we this hour went like that? So here's, I'm going to show you some little tricks, right? And you can go back and watch this. And what I'll do is I'll make this configuration downloadable. So if you want to go and play with these, you can. I'm going to go ahead and create an empty one here and call it script 2. And I typically go absolute on these. Take a source, and then I'm going to go over here. Let's do this. Let's make this all program. Okay, so that's going to load that here. I'll make it a little bigger, sorry. Now, let's say I want that layer to fly in, okay? Well, I can adjust, if I were to clear this, I can go to preview and I can adjust this layer here, right? And if I remember, I use my roller ball on my mouse, I can zoom out of the simulator a little bit. And if I push down, I can pan around. But I can say, let's move that layer up here, okay? Outside of the pixel space, right? And notice when I hit program, it comes up there, right? So now what I can do is I can add, I'm gonna add a couple extra cues to this element. And what I'm gonna do is I say, when I go to program, that's where it's gonna start. It's gonna go to program, but it's gonna start outside the pixel space. What I can then do is add a keyframe, okay? I'm gonna jump down, and then what I'm gonna do is I'm gonna say, bring that layer in. Just drop it in, okay? And then on the next cue, I'll add another one to say, take it off the screen. Okay, so now if I go clear, preview, notice it starts off program, Now it's going to fly in. Next cue flies out. Okay, and you can play with that a little bit too. So say you want, let's clear that. Say we want it to be really small like this. I can try to zoom in on this a little bit. Center. Bring it back. Program. First cue flies on. Next cue flies down. Now, what's nice is that you can copy these elements. So I can drag this down, hold the Control key, click, drag, and I'm going to offset it by 1 cue, right? Now this one has graphics 1, graphics 1. So if I were to just simply launch this up again, brings that one in, brings that one in. It's the same source though, right? So what I could do is just simply change this source to something else. iMac. So clear, program, down, bring in the next source, fly it in, bring in the next source. So you could copy that multiple times. I could take that, drop it there, oops, there, 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 and I'm just hitting click, drag, drop, click, drag, drop, click, drag, drop. I'm a control, click, drag, drop, so my apologies. This one is going to have Mustang. This one is going to have, I'm just picking different sources here. And let's call you Blu-ray. So now, taking it from the top, start here, down, 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 and I can walk through just a little sequence like that and very easily replicate that little keyframe move for each one. That would work the same for mixers as well. It just use more layers. That's all. Let me take a peek at some of these questions before the hour ends. Again, I knew this topic is between command keys and scripting. It's a juggernaut of a topic, right? And we will have probably a more advanced scripting class, but I just wanted to get a taste out there for you guys to have this. Let me look at these questions here real quick, see what we got. And hopefully I can address them. Let's see, what's the interface design error and script element layer being 2 rows long only appears for the 1 cue on program. It shows the layer in preview while being on program, but the layer disappears when advancing to the next cue. That's it's a lengthy question. The trick here with, sorry, right here, sorry, on this first page, remember these are 2 cues. Remember the next cue from Q1 is 2, but that's, remember, the only way that element can stay in program is if it's in between, it's below the top and above the bottom. So it's got to be in the middle for it to stay on the screen. Okay, I'll answer that question with a little more detail. Joel, do you have something as I start to look at these questions, or mute?
Yeah, a couple quick questions, real simple stuff. Moving the queue backward, the queue line backwards, it's a double click on the queue is typically how I like to do that.
It's really the only way to do that.
Yeah. I think you can use some external protocol to move it up and down, plus or minus.
Yeah.
To do that. And then we didn't discuss anything to do with timing or jump cues, which we'll probably touch on our advanced.
Yeah, I think. Let me give you a little tease on that. All right, I'll just tease this a little bit, right? So we have this sequence here, and if you click on the left side, that's called the Q data menu. Okay. So in each command key, you're going to see this, and it's where it says preview program, and I click on it, and you can actually see it's a name, right? But there are jump options and there are triggers. So I can say on this cue, wait a specified amount of time. I'll say 3 seconds at this cue, right? So when I were to go clear, take it back, preview, and I hit space bar, it's gonna go 3, oh, I picked the wrong one. That was my bad. Bear with me. Bear with me, why? Oh, because I didn't put in a time. That's interesting. There we go. So now you can see Let me clear that real quick. Preview. So now you can see when I added that wait trigger, it put in a little clock over here, and then it has a time. So a specified amount of time. And the time that we're talking about here is hours, minutes, seconds, and frames. And the frames are more centi, so they're 30 frames per second versus 60 frames per second. So if I were to go to program now, you're going to see the Q line pop down, and you're going to see this over here in the script ID, you're going to see the clock source actually count down those 3 seconds. So if I hit the space bar, it's going to go 3, 2, 1, and then jump to the next queue. Okay, so you can add in those triggers to say wait at this queue for this amount of time, then advance, then wait at this queue for a specified amount of time, then advance. There are a couple others in there that I don't want to get too deep into because the topic is just too extensive. But there are also, when I get to say the bottom, right, I can say jump direct back to Q1, right? So as I start this command key real quick, back at program, 3 seconds, goes over, now next, then next, then next. And I got to be careful with my keyframes and everything, because when I get to that last queue, Q9, it's going to jump right back up to Q1, and then 2, and then 3, and so on and so forth. So again, crazy topic, so you got to watch out for that one. But it's a fun one to play with, and you can experiment with it. I'm just going to look at some more of these questions. Can you post a link to the previous webinars? Yes, they're all on the they're in the YouTube, the Christie Digital YouTube channel. I'll make sure that that link is displayed in the video and the recording. How do you make the all pixel space show your screens that you have created? That's what you can do real quick. Just simply go make sure you're in the all pixel space view here. Okay. Right click and say current background, and just say no background. And then that way you can still see the other ones beneath it. That was in a prior webinar. Okay. Looping scripts, automatic advancement. I think I just touched on that one right there. What else? Interface. Am I missing anything?
Yeah, why don't you just show them quickly? Right-clicking on a queue, you can add keyframes and queue lines, queue spaces. Okay. If you right-click on a queue.
Deleting. Yeah. So let me go back to this. I apologize. So say you get to this queue and you want to insert a queue. Maybe you want something else to happen. You can right-click right here and say insert queue. And it'll basically shift everything down and create an empty queue there. And what will happen is when we start here and we hit this one, and remember the driving queue or the driving keyframe, all it's going to do is drive this graphics item there. Let's clear this because I've got multiple stuff going on there. I go to here and I go to here. All it's going to do is just continue that same keyframe through this queue, so nothing happens, right? And then when I hit the next one, then it flies, it does its crossfade back over. And in the same breath, if I want to remove a queue, I can just simply go over here, right click, and remove queue. Okay. And same with the keyframes. When I right click and add a keyframe, that's just for that element. If I want to add it, say I have multiple elements across here, I can go over to the queue data menu, right click, and add keyframes. It'll add keyframes for any item, any element in that list. So with that, again, boy, that hour went fast. We'll do another one on scripting, I promise. There are other elements that you can use, but again, it's trust me, these webinars are for informative purposes. So by no means is anybody going to become an expert from the webinar. Always when things come back to normal, get yourself into in-class training, and we'll get you squared away on that. Like I said, if there's any other questions here that I missed, I'll do my best to respond to them directly. Thanks again to Joel and Jason. Anyway, thanks again, everybody.